Hello and welcome back to the Bakerloo Line in TSW2, where today we're seeing these questionable cinematic camera movements. I've never seen Dovetail try that before, at least in TSW. Okay, you can read that message on the screen for yourself. I shouldn't have to. But yeah, this is one of these scenarios. This is another one of these scenarios that comes with the New Journeys expansion pack, which is obviously meant to, I think it's meant to enhance like the experience of we're playing on the three default routes in TSW, but personally I don't really see much of it, to be honest. But yeah, this is another livery for the London Underground 1972 stock. And I'm walking slowly along the side of the train so that you can get a good look at it. Personally, I'm a bit indifferent on this livery, and I think it's meant to represent how the 1972 stock. Hello, is that the new livery or old one? No, that's the current livery. Yeah, I think this is meant to represent the how the 72 stock looked in their original condition, though as far as I can tell there hasn't been any alterations to the interior. Well done, Dovetail. And surely they wouldn't have these modern decals on the units back in the early days. I'm not surprised at all that nothing's been changed with the sounds. So yeah, as the on-screen display said earlier, we're currently at Stonebridge Park Depot, and we've got to set the brakes for a start. Turn on the saloon lights, and the directions look to the forward. This should be interesting. Actually, I'm going to see if I can set the destination display to say special. Ordinarily, I would say it would get it to read. To read Elephant and Castle, but in this instance, we're not going to Elephant and Castle today. This is a strange, almost like excursion to London Road Depot. Because when I was looking through the list of timetable mode scenarios, I saw that it's as if they play out in sequence, sort of. Or like the first two certainly do. It's like a two-parter. Where in this one, you've got to take the train down to London Road Depot, and then in the next scenario, I think you do like a rail tour, sort of, to not Elephant and Castle, to Harrow and Wealdstone. And one thing, well, firstly, is it just me, or do these red doors look far too bright? I mean, there probably is just me, but I do remember that the 72 stock did look, from what I've seen in like old photographs, the 72 stock did look something like this in their early days. But it's either that or they looked. Well, I might be getting their original look confused with the pre-refurbishment 73 stock from the Piccadilly line. Because the 73 stock had a half the cab end was red, kind of like how you get yellow ends on mainline trains, but technically the tube is not like a mainline service. Contact the signaller to pass the signal. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Now, if only you could if you could actually press the buttons on this thing, because that's the controls for the announcements, I believe, at least. Because I remember when I used to play World of Subways Volume 3, which had the Circle line and the old C stock, that train had a fully operational announcement set up, and for the life of me, I could not understand why Dovetail didn't implement that in TSW, since it's a far more modern game with a lot more, well, certainly more advanced technology behind it. So yeah, I mean, might have been to do with licensing. I don't really know. Yeah, this station, of course, is Stonebridge Park itself, and now we're joining the main Watford DC line. Because of course, on the section between Queen's Park and Harrow and Wealdstone, the Bakerloo line uses the same track or uses the Watford DC line, so it shares the same track as the London Overground trains on the London Euston to Watford Junction service. Now, I don't know what this road is, but it's clearly some sort of dual carriageway. Well, not really. It's not a dual carriageway because it looks like it's 4 lanes each side. I don't recall seeing that sort of thing in New Zealand before. Most I remember seeing was about 6 lanes, 3 in each direction. And of course, in the background here, you can see Wembley Stadium. And usually, when I'm going south out of Stonebridge Park, I do like to get this shot or the screenshot with the train and the stadium in the background. And from what I gather, the current Wembley Stadium was opened in 2002, and it was on a site. I think it was on a site that was originally, at least according to one of Jago Hazard's videos, it was a site originally meant for a huge tower, championed by a guy called Sir Edward Watkin, and it was meant to be, I think it was meant to be like the British equivalent of the Eiffel Tower, but the project ended up being a massive failure and got the nickname Watkins Folly. So yeah, that's the modern livery that we just passed, the current underground livery, and personally that modern livery that the underground trains have is my personal favourite tube livery. Either that or the old London Transport Maroon that the 1938 stock traditionally carried. Even the version on the Isle of Wight with the yellow ends. Speaking of the Isle of Wight, that's another route that we've got in TSW, although generally I don't drive on it. I certainly don't make videos on the Isle of Wight anymore, at least not nowhere near as often as I used to, because I can see that generally people don't like those sorts of videos, so I try not to bother with that sort of thing. This station we're just passing through now is Harlesden, so that means the next one we'll pass through is Wealdstone Junction, which will be followed by Kensal Green, and then Queen's Park. I've just realised I've slowed down for that 30 limit a bit too early. And of course, as we go along the section between this whole section between Queen's Park and Harrow and Wealdstone, not only are we sharing tracks with the London Overground and the Watford DC line, but we also run alongside the West Coast Main Line for most of the journey. And this section, at least in TSW, I think is the worst part of the route, for the simple reason that Dovetail did not bother putting in overground trains, like the Class 378 or 710, even just as AI, and they certainly did nothing for the West Coast Main Line AI traffic. So there's no Class 390s, 350s, 221s, what have you, or I guess even 319s. Yeah, it just looks terrible when you're driving along the West Coast Main Line, which is one of the busiest routes in the UK, and then you see absolutely nothing. It just looks stupid. And this is of course Wealdstone Junction. So these are the low-level platforms, and up top here there's these platforms are used. These are additional overground platforms, but they're used by trains on the Stratford to Richmond and Clapham Junction services. But despite them being overground platforms, I see Dovetail got the detail there slightly wrong, because that should be an orange roundel instead of red. And then again, I'm not surprised that Dovetail got that wrong. I suppose there's no need to complain about it. Actually, they're probably thinking there's such a small detail, and no one's going to bother noticing. Or I'll tell you one thing, I'm not one of those sorts of people. There's another train. I've noticed that in a lot of cases the AI, especially on the Long Island Railroad, the AI in scenarios these scripted scenarios seems to be a lot more intense than it is on in timetable mode. And in the case of the LIRR especially, it's just very strange. And of course it doesn't really help when the LIRR is one of the most dull, boring and lifeless routes that TSW's ever had. Actually, I just thought, since in this scenario we're technically running a special train, like, does the Underground actually do this sort of thing in real life? I mean, I know there's that preserved 4-car 1938 stock unit from the London Transport Museum, and I know that occasionally does excursions on the Underground, but I would have thought that they couldn't do that sort of thing for the most part, especially on like the Victoria line. Like, there's no way in hell you'd be able to do. Hold on. Sorry, I was just having a drink. But yeah, there's no way you'd be able to do like a rail tour on the Victoria line when it's an extremely intensive timetable with trains running like every 90 to 100 seconds. Mind you, it was never really intended to be potentially used for rail tours. Then again, I don't think any of the tube lines were. But yeah, as far as I know, I don't think they're actually, no, I wonder if the 1938 stock, that preserved unit, ever actually has done excursions on the Bakerloo line. Because if so, I can't imagine they would have been able to hang around at the stations for all that long. I mean, if anything, if they got to Elephant and Castle, they could probably just park the train, like for a layover there. They could probably just like park the train in the siding, or in the one of the two reversing sidings, while the regular service trains go about their business. Because that's something else I don't think I've ever brought up before, in the previous occasions where I've covered the Bakerloo line on the channel, that just past the even though Elephant and Castle is the southern terminus of the Bakerloo line, just past the platforms you see that, well, if you go on the 2D map, you'll see that just past the platforms there's actually a couple of extra reversing sidings, and from what I gather, they do actually use them to stable at least 2 trains there overnight. There's another train going either to Stonebridge or all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone. Yeah, this is another fascinating aspect of the line, is when you get to go through the essentially what I think is pretty much a train shed at Queen's Park, and those 2 tracks in the middle are additional, well, they're mainly reversing sidings actually, because Queen's Park is the terminus for the vast majority of services on this line, and this is also the last overground station, I should add. So once we've stopped here and presumably taken on passengers, we'll go into the tunnels and we'll stay underground until the entrance to the yard at London Road Depot. So I think we branch off the main line between Waterloo and Lambeth North. Come on, stop in the right place. Of course he didn't. It's time for it's time to run a door test. Open the left side doors. Okay. Well, when are you going to give me the chance? Yeah, they don't hang around. They don't hang around on this line. They only let you open the doors are only meant to be open for 15 seconds. Actually, I wonder if that's how it is in real life, where they only have the doors open where they only meant to open the doors for 15 seconds. Right, signal's clear, we can go. 5 miles to London Road Depot. That's, as I should add, that distance counter, the distance ticks down like as the crow flies. It's not like in the old train simulator where it counts the actual, or it does actually count the, or it doesn't do. The old train simulator doesn't tick the distance down as the crow flies. It does it by the actual length of the track between you and the next waypoint. And I'm not sure why TSW has it set up to do it as the crow flies. Yes, as far as I know, tube drivers generally don't use the whistles on these trains. Actually, I just thought of something else. Considering that we're now a non-stop run all the way to this depot, then I have a feeling that even though it's relatively, this scenario is quite early in the morning, I have a feeling that at some point before too long we'll end up getting like having to follow yellow and red signals. But either way, it's still pretty cool that we get to sail through these platforms without stopping. Hello mate, sorry, you'll have to wait for the next train. That was Kilburn Park they've just whizzed through. So that means the next station will be Maida Vale, or as Tom from Duck DJ Productions called it, Made of Ale. So it sounds like a station where you could go and get really drunk. And I generally have trouble remembering the station order on the Bakerloo line, especially south of Queen's Park. But I do remember that there's at least, I think there's 25 stations on this route, and 15 of them are underground. And the other thing I remember is that the underground network, or the London Underground Network, despite its name, I think only about half or 48% of the network is actually underground. And there's Maida Vale that was whizzing past. So the next station will be Warwick Avenue. Now that I think about it, I wonder if I should wind the destination display to read it's special, if it's even got that option. No, it doesn't. It's a bit strange. I suppose I could just leave it on Waterloo. And then I guess once we've gone through Embankment, I'll probably change it to, if I remember, once we've gone through Embankment, I'll change it to say not in service. Either I've just got the volume settings really low, or the noise in the tunnels is just that quiet. Another curious thing about the underground is that when you're actually on sections of track where it doesn't share with National Rail, with like National Rail, the way the speed limit boards work is slightly different, because they you can accelerate to the new speed limit once you've actually, like, when the front of the train passes that board. Normally you have to wait until the back of the train has cleared the speed board before you can accelerate. And I'm not entirely sure why they've got it set up that way for the underground itself, but there you go. I did see when we were above ground that we do have to follow the speed boards in the same way, the same manner as the National Rail services. Although, come to think of it, even though north of Queen's Park we do run along National Rail lines, I don't get why the 72 stock doesn't have AWS. Because you would think that all trains running over National Rail lines would need to have AWS, but I mean, obviously there's some way where the 72 stock gets an exemption. It's like, I think the Class 165 DMUs that run the Chiltern Railway service out of London Marylebone, hold on a second. They've got like some sort of special safety device to be able to run on the same track as like the London Underground Metropolitan Line. And speaking of, wait, no, the Metropolitan Line isn't. No, well, the original this station that we're going through now, Paddington, albeit not these specific platforms, was the starting point for the original Metropolitan Railway when it opened in 1863. And technically the Metropolitan Line did still serve Paddington until 1990, because that was when the Hammersmith City Line was created. And before that, that section from Paddington down to Hammersmith via, I think via Wood Lane, or Royal Oak especially, that section was originally a branch of the Metropolitan. And what else? I know that, I think there are at least one or two stations on the Bakerloo line where you do have an interchange with the Metropolitan. Baker Street is certainly one of them. Actually, it might be the only one. Because technically, the Bakerloo line also has a station at Edgware Road, which is... Wait, no, not even Edgware Road is served by the Metropolitan. It's just the Circle, H&C and District. That was the station that we're passing through now. Actually, no, I think this one we're going through now is Edgware Road. It's a bit difficult to tell when you're going past at like 20 or 25 miles an hour. But no, as I was saying, that was Edgware Road, and it's curious because you've got there's obviously the Bakerloo station, but then you also have the other one for the other Edgware Road is for the District, Circle, and Hammersmith and City lines, and yet they're technically separate stations. And like when I last looked at the tube map, I could have sworn that it didn't show those two stations as like a proper interchange, or like even an out of station interchange. And it's not like Black Horse Road, which is served by both the Overground and the London Underground Victoria Line. By the way, this is Marylebone. I think that's Marylebone at least, because it's too late to check now. And what was this? Sorry, I sometimes forget. Like sometimes I'll just be chattering away and then randomly forget the main subject, and I get all confused. But yeah, I think it was Black Horse Road. Yeah, that's a station that is marked as a proper interchange. I think because it's served by both the London Overground on the Gospel Oak to Barking line, and this station's Jerry Rafferty song. You can tell because of the silhouette of Sherlock Holmes on the platforms or on the walls. I'm trying to think of other. Oh, this you probably didn't notice it, but we just went through a junction of sorts, and if I go to the 2D map, you can see that there's these lines branching off in other directions. And whilst that may not seem like much, that's actually that's the connection with the old Stanmore branch, which was taken over by and became part of the Jubilee line in 1979. Originally, of course, the Jubilee went from Stanmore to Charing Cross, and the only part of that route that was actually built brand new was, I believe it was the section from Baker Street to Charing Cross. I think it was like new stations at Green Park and Bond Street. And originally, from what I understand, at least from what I've seen in Jago Hazard's videos, when he's talked about the original Jubilee line, he was saying the original, I think the station we're going through is Regent's Park. But no, Jago Hazard was saying that originally the Jubilee line was originally meant to be called the Fleet Line, and it was, instead of taking the route that it eventually did with the extension, it was originally meant to go past Charing Cross and then on to I think it would have gone on towards like Thamesmead or out through East London, because that's the thing with lines south of or east of the city or the central city, is that generally there's barely any London Underground lines that even go south of the river, let alone out to the East End. I mean, that they've got the Docklands Light Railway now, so I suppose that's probably a decent alternative to the Underground for all I know. And as I said, originally Charing Cross, from what I gather, wasn't originally intended to be the terminus. Well, because I think that was only meant to be like the first phase of the route. I think it was meant to be a station. It was meant to have a connection with the main line at Fenchurch Street, instead of having like an out of station interchange where you get off the train at Fenchurch Street and then to get to the tube you have to go to Tower Hill and get on the Circle or District lines. Alright, this station, that's Oxford Circus, where you can change. This is where you can change to the Central or Victoria lines. And above us is the rather busy shopping parade of Oxford Street. And so in the end, the Jubilee line, when it did finally get extended, it was a completely different route to what was originally intended, and it went down. I think it goes down to under the Thames to Waterloo and Southwark, then back under the Thames again and up through like Canning, I think through Canary Wharf and Canning Town, and on to, and eventually terminates at Stratford. And of course at Stratford there's a connection with the National Rail Services, the London Overground, the DLR and the Central Line. And Stratford really is one of those It is one of the major interchange stations outside of the central London termini. So it's kind of like in Germany, where you've got the main station in the centre of the city, or the Hauptbahnhof, and then in a lot of cases you've got other big stations out in the suburbs, presumably to relieve congestion from the central station. Right, I think the last station we went through was Oxford Circus, so that means that yep, coming up on Piccadilly Circus. And of course, this is that curious section at the northern end where the tunnels are open because of that crossover. Although, as far as I can tell, I don't even know if they ever use that crossover. I'm going to see if we can get a head out view, because of course you can't do a proper. You can't like press the number 2 key and go to the external view when you're in the tunnels. Yeah, I've only just noticed, like, when you're actually driving along, not stopping at any of the stations, the journey actually seems to go by a lot faster than usual, which is no surprise really, because of course with all these stations in such close proximity over such a short route, it does take quite a while to cover it all. I think it's only about 7 miles from Queen's Park to Elephants and Castle, and because of the fact that you've got to serve 15 stations, it takes like 35 minutes to cover that 7.5 miles, which does seem rather slow and almost inefficient to me. Right, this next station we're coming up on is Charing Cross, where there's obviously an interchange with the mainline station, which is served by South Eastern. And I think other tube lines that serve here, I think it's just the Northern Line. Because of course Charing Cross and Embankment are somewhat infamous for being ridiculously close together, which is saying a lot considering generally for a metro system like the Underground, the stations are generally pretty close together. And I think in the Northern Line's case, hold on a second. I think what we now know as the Charing Cross branch of the Northern Line, that was originally built, I think it was like the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, or the Hampstead Tube. And originally the southern terminus was Embankment. And rather strangely, there was a returning loop, there was like a turning loop, similar to what Kennington has today, that partially went under the River Thames. And I didn't know about that until I was watching one of Jeff Marshall's videos. And yeah, there's just so many, there's just such an unbelievably high number of unusual or unique aspects of the Underground. In a lot of cases it really is quite a lot for one to get their head around, but I think I've got a basic understanding of the overall thing. In terms of history, I know that the 1972 stock, they were ordered in the early 70s, and I think they were originally for the Northern Line I think they were meant to either supplement or replace some of the oldest surviving 1938 stock trains. Although I think the Northern Line was, by that point, and even into as late as the 90s, the Northern Line was the domain of the 1959 stock. And the 72 stock was ordered in quite a hurry because the the 72 stock was ordered in such a hurry that there wasn't really any time to design an entirely new train, and so the design for the 72 stock was derived straight from the 1967 stock that was the original Victoria Line trains. And what was curious is that the Victoria Line has always, even in the days of the 67 stock, has always used a form of automatic train operation. But as for the 72 stock, as far as I know, these trains are driven manually. Certainly that's still the case today. That just down there in that tunnel, you can just about see it. I think I just saw the platform, well, the southbound, there's the platform at Lambeth North. But obviously this is also where we branch off and take the very steeply graded branch to London Road Depot. Ugh, clipping through the tunnel, don't like that. I would have thought Dovetail would have noticed that problem. But then again, in these tunnels it's so dark that you can barely see anything. And yeah, generally I drive, like usually when I'm on the underground sections, I do like to drive with at least one of the cab lights on. Even though I can't imagine that they would do that in real life. Another thing I remember about the 1972 stock is that these were actually the first trains to run on the Jubilee line when it first opened in 1979. And then they had the 1983 stock, which was like, well, I should say the unusual 1983 stock, which was kind of like a direct, like deep level tube version of the District Line's D78 stock, and that led to a number of strange aspects because, for starters, the 1983 stock carried over the strange single-leaf door design from the D78, which, I mean, I'm not sure what the benefits were of that, but yeah, apparently there were quite a few problems with the 1983 stock, and when the plan came to extend the line round like to Waterloo, Southwark, and eventually Stratford and all those places, apparently the original plan was to refurbish the 1983 stock, but in the end they decided to just go to get the new 1996 stock instead, which I think is quite curious. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because personally I didn't really like the 1983 stock, and the 96 stock, just by the sound alone, is one of the most unique deep level tube trains, at least in my opinion. Like, if you go on YouTube and look up a video of the London Underground 1996 stock, just listen to the sound of the motors. It really is quite distinctive. To me, they sound a bit like networkers, like the Class 465s, especially the ones before they got the Hitachi motors. Although I think that classic networker sound is mainly attributed to like the 365s, as well as I think it was the Metro Camel 465s and all the 466s. Because I think originally the 465s that were built by British Rail Engineering Limited and ABB, they had that was originally those units originally had brush motors, from what I gather, and then those were the units that eventually got refitted with Hitachi motors, and then they now sound like the Class 395s. But anyway, so I think throughout their lives, the 72 stock have served at least on the like Northern and Jubilee lines, and curiously, there's one unrefurbished unit that's apparently permanently stationed at Aldwych, which is the terminus of a short branch off the Piccadilly line, and that's used as like essentially a film prop, as near as makes no difference. And of course these days generally the 72 stock is kept on the Bakerloo line, and is certainly the only route where they still run in regular service. But yeah, that has been a somewhat rambly journey down from Stonebridge Park with the old aluminium reskin for the 72 stock, and I do hope that you've enjoyed it, and especially if you've learnt a bit about the underground. Even though don't come to me for an encyclopedic knowledge of the tube. Like, I'm certainly not as much of an expert as Jeff Marshall, but anyway, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching, and I hope you're enjoying my first looks at the New Journeys edition for TSW, and yeah, there's not really a lot else I can think of to say, so yeah, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.